I'm JJ Heller, and this is Instrumental, a show about the big and small moments that shape our lives. In every episode, my guest and I start near the end of their story and work our way back to the beginning. I hope our conversation reminds you that every second matters, because none of us knows which moment will be the one that changes everything.
Big love happens in the small moments.
Hey everybody, it's JJ.
Hey, nobody, it's Dave.
Nobody.
You're always greeting everybody. I figured nobody should get a shout out. What up, nobody?
Have you ever wondered what it's like to work as a writer on a TV show or a blockbuster movie?
I have.
Well, David, our guest this week, will give you a window into what it's like working in Hollywood.
That's right, JJ. Our guest, Allan Heinberg, is such a thoughtful and insightful person. And I know you, listener, are going to really enjoy hearing his story. Allan has been a writer on several different network and cable TV shows.
And the thing that I love about this episode is how Allan came into it knowing the premise of our show, but over the course of our conversation, he saw connections and pivotal moments of his story that he'd never noticed before.
That's like the kind of stuff I live for. Well, in order to set up the most recent act of Allan's story, we first need to fill you in on a little bit of his career.
After first coming to LA to be a television writer over 20 years ago, he wrote for several recognizable TV shows, including Party of Five,
Heard of that one.
Grey's Anatomy,
Heard of that one too.
and Gilmore Girls,
I don't know about that one. Just kidding.
just to name a few.
He stepped away from working with TV studios in order to write for Marvel Comics, and after a few years of unsuccessfully trying to create his own TV show, he came back to write with his old boss, Shonda Rhimes, the creator of Grey's Anatomy. All right, JJ, let's hear it.
Act 3, A Life of Its Own. In 2012, after finding himself on a team of writers for the first time in years, Allan was very much at home, collaborating with his peers, writing episodes for the show Scandal. Little did he know that a significant opportunity was just around the corner.
There's that saying, you have to give it all up to get it all back. I knew intellectually that that was true, but I don't think I'd ever actually experienced it. I think I would sometimes pretend to let it go with one eye and then have one eye waiting for it to walk back in the door.
Have I given it up?
I'm like, I'm giving it up. I swear I'm giving it up. Where is it? Where is it?
Right.
But this was the one time where I really felt like, you know what, I don't need any of that to happen. And then in very short order, I got a call about the Wonder Woman movie out of the blue, which I turned down 11 times.
Why?
Well, for a lot of reasons. I was like the sixth writer brought on to that project. Eventually there were 13 people on the project.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it was a troubled project, but I was really happy at Scandal. And so I had a call from a friend of mine at DC Comics saying, look, could we just buy you for one night, come and have dinner with Zack Snyder and his team? Because I was a Wonder Woman, I'd been a fan since I was a kid. I'd written a play about her. I'd written the comic book for DC Comics. I knew the character intimately. And so my friend at DC said, no one knows her the way that you know her. A lot of people know and love her, but my take on her, he knew my take on her. And he knew I was very passionate about her. And I think at that point they had thrown out a couple of scripts and Zack Snyder just needed to be reminded, I think, at that moment of who this character is and why it's important to do this film. And so my buddy Jeff Johns, who was chief creative officer at DC Comics, brought me in to Zach's office one night, and it was just going to be for 2 hours.
Can you just, had you met Zach before?
No, I'd never met Zach. It was very intimidating to walk into his compound. It's very fancy.
Like his residence?
No, he had a whole office, a warren of offices and costume models of Ben Affleck and Henry Cavill and Gal Gadot. It was very grand. I was this TV writer walking into DC Comics movie paradise, and it was very daunting. And they all had tattoos and facial hair that was very well groomed and suspenders. And they looked very cool. And I was not cool. And Zach is awesome and cool and like tattoos. And he's got a surfer vibe. And I am this nerdy guy walking in from my day on Scandal. So
you had already done a day of work.
Yeah, this day was weird. So I had gotten permission from my friend and boss in the writer's room at Scandal, Mark Wilding, to leave a little bit early, like leave at 5:30 instead of 6, because I had to drive to Zach's office in Pasadena, where I'd never been, and meet Jeff there. And I drove there. I gave them my takeout order. The assistant, Trevor, had called ahead to say, what do you want from Tender Greens? And my chicken was waiting for me when I got there. And I met
Fancy.
a room full of strangers and Zack Snyder and his whole team and one of the other producers on the movie, Rebecca Rovin. And it was fairly intimidating. And then Zach sort of pitched me their take on the character and their take on the story, and a little bit about Batman versus Superman, which was all top secret at the time. And then basically he said, well, you talk. What do you think of all this coming from the character point of view? So I was nervous about just what I was walking into. I was mostly nervous that I was going to hurt his feelings, because I have very proprietary feelings about these characters because I've loved them for as long as I have. So I was nervous about being too honest. And I was like, I want to be valuable, but I'm going to try not to hurt anybody's feelings. And so when Zach told me the direction that they were going in, I really felt like it was not the direction I would have gone in. What I wanted to say and what I eventually said to Zach was like, look, you guys have bought me for 3 hours and for the price of this chicken dinner. So the only way I'm going to be valuable to you, Zack Snyder, movie director, famous guy, is by being as honest as I possibly can be. And I'm going to really try not to offend. And he was like, dude, like, that's the only reason you're here, is because we want you to be honest. And I said, and look, if I do end up hurting anybody's feelings, I can leave and I'll pay for the chicken and no harm, no foul. Like, it's fine.
I want to just point out that, like, I think in some instances, we as audience members perceive these brands to be like larger than life. But behind every brand is just like a group of people eating takeout chicken, trying not to offend each other.
That is exactly, you have just summed up Hollywood in one sentence.
I mean, I think to get anything creative done, some people have to sit in a room and come up with an idea and actually agree on it.
Yeah.
And if they don't, then the product is just going to be garbage.
Yes. I learned a lot about that doing this job, the way that it sort of turned out. With these big Hollywood tentpole movies too, it's very difficult to get a consensus, right? Because there's so much money at stake, and it's not just this movie, it's the future of this character. It's the whole franchise.
Right.
But with Wonder Woman, I think because they were a year into development and they knew when they were shooting, they were under the gun. And so I sort of walked in at a very fortuitous moment. You know, they were sort of looking for a new direction, and then I came in and I pitched my direction. I was very, very honest with all of them, and sometimes they fought back. And I said, look, I have no skin in the game. Like, you guys can do the movie you want to do. I'm just saying, I've spent a lot of time with this character, and here are the pitfalls. Here are the traps. Here are the moments that really, really matter when you're telling a Wonder Woman story. And here is where I have gotten into trouble historically when I'm trying to tell a Wonder Woman story. So it was that kind of a conversation. And then, you know, at the end of the night, I shook everybody's hand and I said, this was really fun. It was a blast just coming to talk about the character, and thank you for the chicken. And then Zach followed me out to my car, and he was like,
Hang on. He literally followed you? Like, you were walking out and it was like, Zach's behind me? Or like, was he like walking beside you?
I think we were it was a conversation that was like spilling out now into the parking lot.
Okay.
Do you know what I mean? Like, because Jeff and I were leaving, and I think Jeff had walked off to go and get his car, and I was walking toward my car. And Zach basically said, hey, what are you doing tomorrow night? And I was like, I think he said, what are you doing tomorrow? And I said, well, Scandal. I go to Scandal. I'm there from like 9 to 6. And he goes, well, what time do you think you could get here? And I said, why? And he said, oh, dude, we're doing your movie. And I was like, what? And he was like, yeah, we're going to do your movie. Like, I'm going to get whiteboards in that room. But like, if you and I and Jeff can get in the room at like 7:15 and maybe go till 11, I think we could just bust this thing out in like a couple of nights. And I just looked at him like, what? And that's what we did. Like 3 nights later, we worked from 7 to 11 or till midnight for the next 3 nights. And then he said, cool, can you write up something over the weekend that I can pitch to the studio? And I said, sure. And then Monday he pitched it to the studio and sold it. And that was the Wonder Woman movie. And he said, okay, dude, you're writing it. You're writing the outline. And I said, no, I'm not. I have a job. I have a full-time job. And so he convinced me, because he's very persuasive. He convinced me to write the outline in my downtime. So I wrote this outline for this movie in a week or 10 days. And we worked on it. And then when that got approved, he said, okay, now you're writing the script. And I said, Zach, I cannot, you guys need this script in like 6 weeks or 8 weeks or however many weeks it was. I said, I'm on Scandal. And he said, do you want me to call Shonda Rhimes right now? And I was like, please don't do that. Please don't call Shonda Rhimes.
Why?
Well, because it's like, she didn't know this was going on, that I was like moonlighting on Wonder Woman movie. And I didn't want her to think that my whole body and soul weren't invested in Olivia Pope and what was going on Scandal. So I said, you know what, let me talk to Shonda and let me she'll say yes or no once and for all. And so I asked Shonda's assistant the next morning if I could have 5 minutes with her. And weirdly, like, Shonda was in my office in 5 minutes. Like, she, up 2 flights to the 4th floor. And she came into my office before work and she said, are you quitting? And I said, no, it's weirder than that. Can you sit down so I can talk you through this?
She walks into your office, and what are you feeling?
I felt like I had been keeping a secret, and I really, really wanted to tell her what was going on so that I didn't have to conceal or feel weird about any of this. And I had already said to her, hey, this has been happening. I didn't put it on your radar because it didn't affect my work at Scandal, but now Zack Snyder is going to call you. And I really just want you to know the whole story so that you have context. But my priority is you and serving you and this show, and you own me. You have a contract with me for the next 2 years. I've already told Zach no 1,000,000 times. So I'm not coming to you and saying, hey, Shonda, can I do this? I am putting this on your radar so that when Warner Brothers and or an agent or Zack Snyder calls you, you know what they're talking about. But I am not asking you for anything. I'm just telling you where I am.
Wow.
And did she know that you had all of this history with Wonder Woman already?
She did. She had read the play that I had written. I had written a play about Wonder Woman. It's very bizarre, my history with this character.
Wow.
And she knew that I had written the comic book because I was writing the Wonder Woman comic when I was on Grey's Anatomy. So she was very aware of all of it. And she said, well, you're doing it. And I said, what? And she said, Allan, it's Wonder Woman. You have to do it. I said, well, what about Scandal? And she said, you know what? Give me 3 afternoons a week in the writer's room and then work on scripts. And the rest of the time you can work on Wonder Woman. And I said, well, do you want me to go down and title and become a consultant and for half the money? And she was like, no, we'll just keep doing what we're doing. And so she let me leave the room for 3 days a week and go write Wonder Woman. And somehow it all got done. My agent at the time said no showrunner in Hollywood would have said that or done that. It was just pure love and friendship on her part. And it was just a life-changing gift that she gave me. I have now, at that point, been in the business many, many, many years. And so when someone says to me, we're making your movie, my reaction is, sure you are.
Cool.
Yeah, we're making this movie, man. We're making it. So at no point, you guys, did I believe that anything was going to come of this. At every point did I believed that I was going to be fired or replaced. Even at the premiere of the movie, I was skeptical. I was super just skeptical. I thought the movie was going to be a bomb. No part of me was invested in my own sense of delight or achievement, or I went through every stage of this process waiting for the sky to come down on top of me. And I actually, you can ask anybody, I quit this project maybe 17 times in the course of, in the 2 years that it took to get it to the screen. Like, I'm a big believer in not being where you're not comfortable and feeling safe. Or if I feel like it's not something that's within my wheelhouse, I'm not going to do it. If I don't think I can give you what I'm promising you, I will not do it. And again, I would say to Zach, like, nope, no, can't do that. Not going to do that. And for some reason, he just kept with me the whole time.
What's an example of that?
Well, like, if we were going to tell, at a certain point, Zach decided to make it about the love story, right? So, which is not a very Zack Snyder thing to do. And it was not something that I expected. Like, Zach loves war. Zach, like Wonder Woman, I think in his mind before I came on board was really about the war aspect of the film. And I saw the axis shift when it became about the relationship between the two of them and the love story. So I know myself well enough, and I know my strengths and weaknesses enough to say, like, hey, if we're telling an emotional story, if we're telling a love story, if we're telling a romantic comic version of this story, yes, I'm your guy, but any other version of it, I'm not your guy, and you need to go the traditional superhero movie route. It only makes sense to hire me if the axis is going to be emotional. That's the only way it makes sense. And to my astonishment, Zach agreed to that early on and committed. And if you've seen the movie, that's the movie.
Yeah.
It's about the two of them. And I think that's what makes Wonder Woman a little different from the other DC films, especially, but it works on an emotional axis. It's a mother-daughter story, and then it becomes, it's the Little Mermaid. That's what I said to Zach that first night. I said, it's mythologically speaking, archetypally speaking, you're talking about Disney's The Little Mermaid. You're talking about growing up. It's Ariel, and her relationship with Triton is very much like Diana's relationship with Hippolyta, and she falls in love with Prince Eric the same way that Diana falls in love with Steve Trevor. And when I pitched it to him as the Little Mermaid, Zach's got 5 kids. Like, he got it right away. He just locked in a way that it felt really resonant. And then anytime it started to stray, I'm the first person to say, I do not know how to do that. I really don't. I'm sorry. I can do this for you and deliver, but I can't do that. And you should probably find somebody who can do that. I think that's really helped me.
Do you think that that's a quality that mostly comes with age?
Yes, I think that it does come with age. I think it has a lot to do with self-awareness, I think being an actor helped me get there earlier because you see very quickly what you're not. Do you know, like, when you don't get job after job after job after job and you see who they do hire, you realize, like, oh, okay, I'm not that. I'm not Brad Pitt. So what am I if I'm not all those things? What you get a sense of, like, where you fit in the environment and how you can be of use. And I also just had a real sense of what I liked writing and what I liked watching.
Yeah.
And for me, romantic comedy has always been the thing. Those are the shows I've pursued, and those are the projects where I know sort of I make sense. And it has to do with my comfort too. Like, I just don't like being in where I don't belong, where I don't fit, and I can feel it in my body.
Is the first time that you saw the finished film in a theater?
Yes. Once I had finished the movie, I was invited to a screening room, an enormous, beautiful screening room. It probably seats 500 people, 700 people. And I was the only one in the theater, and they ran the movie for me. And I watched it like 9 o'clock in the morning to 11 o'clock in the morning by myself in the theater.
What was that like?
I am very opinionated. So I had opinions, but it was too late. Like, it was this very disorienting experience where you're giddy and you're like, oh, no. Why was that choice made? I don't understand. Why did they rewrite that scene? I don't understand. I was conflicted. I was blown away too. It was really powerful. But when you've got so many opinions, you can't just, you're feeling a lot. And, like, I love that people love the movie. I love that it has given me opportunities that I don't know that I would have had prior to that credit. It grew me over the year that I was working on that script. I learned an enormous amount. I worked with incredible people. So again, like the day-to-day of it, I was always sort of enjoying the collaborative aspect of it and the writing of it, but I never had that, okay, I've made it. I've made the Wonder Woman movie. Like even now, it's a little weird to me to say it out loud. Like writers are not in charge on movies. We are passengers in a process that involves hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of other people. And so I was on that movie for a while, but I wasn't on it from beginning to end. And so what I saw in the theater was a complete surprise to me. I had nothing to do with the production of the movie, which is a weird thing because in TV, I'm involved in every aspect of it. So it was very alien to me. A lot of the lessons that I continue trying to learn, it's about ego and about attachment and letting go, and just whatever suffering I have experienced in my life has been attached to my ego and thinking about myself and my role and do people like me? Do people not like me? All of that stuff. And the older I get, the easier it is to sort of see those feelings as extensions of my own ego. And once I'm aware of them as that, it's easier to sort of let go and not attach. But I have a great therapist, and we've been working together for a long time. And so by the time it happened, it just seemed like a lovely bit of grace. It didn't feel earned or deserved. I never expected this to happen, and it was lovely.
Do you feel like there's been a moment that you've been able to celebrate the film?
There was this incredible thing I didn't see coming where women, especially who saw the movie, there's not a man on screen for the first almost half hour of the movie. And seeing those women in a community together, fighting and loving and laughing, even writing it. Like I was just writing the story of Wonder Woman. I didn't think like, oh, we're really going to tap into something, a kind of representation of women on film, especially in these big superhero movies that no one's ever seen or experienced before. So when people started reporting that and just this like gut reaction that it woke something up in them, and I'm talking about 60 and 70-year-old women coming up to me and saying like, I experienced this, like I just started crying and I didn't understand why at first. That's when I started thinking like, oh, this has taken on a life completely of its own. And so that to me was just an astonishing revelation. That was a gift.
I just want to point out that what brought Allan joy out of this entire experience was not the fame or the recognition, but it was in creating something meaningful, something that touched people's lives.
I think it's also so admirable to see how he knew what his skill set was and didn't want to fight to the death to get his way. He was willing to step aside if the vision for the project was different than what he was able to bring to the table. I definitely have people-pleasing tendencies, and I can really get myself into trouble when I try to guess what people want and then produce it.
When you don't have the skills to pay the bills.
Yeah. Like when I'm trying to be somebody else, like if ever I step into a room and I'm like, I'm going to belt this one out and do all these runs and trills, it never turns out well.
Thus said the lullaby singer.
I know. I'm like, so if you need a song that's like spoken but sung a little bit very quietly, I'm your girl.
Don't ask JJ to do a Kelly Clarkson impression is basically what she's saying.
Yeah.
Well, before we hear Act 2 of Allan's story, we need to go back in time to the late 90s.
Yes.
High school JJ and Dave didn't know each other yet.
Aww.
JJ, what do you remember about the late 90s?
Okay, I think this might have passed before the late 90s. It might have been early 90s. But do you remember the little, like, hard plastic circles that had the line through it? And women would use it you would, like, weave the edge of your giant shirt through it? and then like cinch it together so that like all of the masses of fabric would be gathered in one spot.
Otherwise, you just looked like you were wearing a muumuu.
Yeah. I don't think those things had a name, but
The circle thing with the line through it.
I know some of them had rhinestones on them. They were very fancy.
Wow. Quite the trend.
Oh, and the little like piece of elastic that had the two little clips on either side. It was like a 3-inch piece of elastic and it had clips, and you would clip it on the back of your vest to like cinch it in at the waist.
Now I know
Do
what
you
you're talking
remember?
about. Yes.
Yeah. Or like the big billowy dresses, you would do that too on the back.
Wow. To provide form
Yes.
to the muumuu. Once again.
To the masses of fabric.
Yeah. Oversized clothes were a really big deal in the 90s.
I had one. I loved it so much. It had like silver, like pewter roses for the clips.
Classy.
And it was so fancy.
Well, JJ was infatuated with her synthetic roses.
Vest clips.
Allan was about to step foot in a legit Hollywood writer's room for the first time to start work on Téa Leoni's sitcom, The Naked Truth. Let's hear it, JJ.
Act 2, Other Plans. When Allan began his career as a television writer, he assumed his previous experience as an actor on Broadway would be a valuable asset. As it turns out, it did prepare him in a surprising way.
Take us into your first experience walking into that writer's room.
Weirdly, and I don't think I've put this together until talking to you about this right now, the Broadway show that I was in New York was about a writer's room on a television show.
That's so meta.
It is. My first experience in a writer's room was actually on a Broadway stage. You know, it was based on Neil Simon's experiences as a kid, being the youngest writer on Sid Caesar's Your Show of Shows in the 50s with Mel Brooks and later with Woody Allen. And so the entire play took place in the writer's room. So I had that experience, but I walked in and, you know, every writer's room is the same in some ways and every writer's room is different. And especially on a sitcom, you walk in and it's a conference room essentially in a nondescript building. It's a great big table with chairs around it. And there's a writer's assistant who's at a computer writing down every word that you say. And there's
Wow.
usually snacks on the table and crayons and crafts. And basically you just sit around all day talking about ideas, and there are whiteboards on all the walls and magic markers. Sitcom rooms are very different from drama rooms in many ways, basically because you're all sort of like pitching jokes together in a sitcom room, which I was a failure at. And that's what you mostly spend your time doing. You know, you write your script and then it's a terrible experience, you guys. The writer's assistant's computer is attached to a screen on the wall. So your script is being broadcast, is being projected on the wall, and it's being torn apart by the showrunner and every other writer in that room, line by line. Like, that's terrible. Let's do better. That's terrible. Let's do better. It's just death by a million cuts.
Yeah.
And it's so public. And you just have to get through it. It's just the worst experience in the entire world. And you have to be really careful because when it's not your script, it's somebody else's work. It's just a minefield, and it takes an incredibly thick skin, whereas a drama room, none of that is going on. A drama room is like, you're talking about story and you're talking about character and you're sharing your life and, you know, hoping that your life stories are going to sort of give inspiration to the characters' stories, but you're going off privately and writing your draft. And when you're being rewritten, it's privately by the showrunner. And there's very little public humiliation involved in writing an hour long. I was 30 years old at the time, and I was very opinionated about all kinds of things, including storytelling. And so, as you might imagine, having been like, you know, they mocked me in the room as being a fancy New York playwright who was coming in and deigning to write sitcoms. And it wasn't that at all. Like, I loved Friends so much at that point. It was in its second season, I think, at that point, or its third season. And so I sort of knew that where I belonged was writing shows more like 30-something in my so-called life. I really was an hour-long drama person. I had no illusions. I was not a joke guy. Whatever humor is in my writing definitely comes through character. I tend not to be very good at building jokes in the traditional way. Like I would be terrible at 30 Rock, which is probably my all-time favorite show, but I don't think I would have survived a minute in that writer's room. So I think I was a disaster on The Naked Truth. I'm quite sure that I was a disaster. Mike very generously was like, no, I wouldn't have you in the room if I didn't think I needed help on the story front. You need those people in the room. And it's true. Like I've now been doing this for 24 years, and it's very, very important to have people pushing story forward in the writer's room.
I was going to say, it kind of like the sitcom room, it almost sounds like improv. Only in like normal improv, you're supposed to say yes and and in the sitcom room, it's like, no, that's dumb.
No, that's terrible. You should take my idea. And there's scorekeeping that goes on, because at the end of the day, you're like, okay, I got 3 ideas on the board. I got 3 ideas on the board. That's good. Tomorrow I'm going to get 4 ideas on the board. Oh no, I only got 1 idea on the board. So it's just this like head game. It's a very competitive atmosphere. Necessarily, it's like, may the best joke win. And I think you're either that's how you're wired and you love that, or you're me and you get out as fast as you can.
Yeah.
Ideally before you get fired. So our ideas about what success is, they form at a very early age, and we don't know anything as kids. We see movies and TV shows, and we see our parents and our friends' parents, and especially in Hollywood, when you're outside of it, it looks really cool. It looks really cool, and you guys, it is really cool. Like when it's working, and you're in a writer's room with people you love, or you're on set with the most incredible actors and you're making scenes and you're filming them. Like it is everything I ever wanted it to be. I love the art of collaboration, and I had always wanted to be part of a theater company when I was growing up and coming up in the business. And television is that. Television, you're putting on a play every day, especially if you're a showrunner. You're surrounded by people who are working at the top of their game, and it's your job to all make something wonderful and beautiful and funny and smart and touching. And it's amazing. The success is getting to that place and doing the job. If you're on a great show and you're a member of Shonda's team, but you're thinking about, okay, well, what about my show? What about my career? What about my brand? You're not being present. You're not actually fulfilling your function and being present and being connected. And that's, I feel like, a lot of the early part of my career, I had an idea about how things should be, or how I should be.
Had you defined that, or was it just this nebulous thing that you were chasing?
No, it was defined. I mean, for people in my line of work, the benchmarks are, hey, when are you going to have your own show? And is it going to be a hit? Or when are you going to write a feature film? Because I think with a lot of TV writers, there's still that, well, we're TV writers, but writing a movie, that's really the sort of the holy grail. That's where the respect is. That's where we all grow up worshiping the movies as kids. And so I think there were those 2 benchmarks that were torturing me. And those things don't have anything to do with like the actual doing of it. It's just those are the things you're chasing. And anything that isn't those benchmarks, if you are as immature as I was at that time, and I'm not saying that I'm mature now. I think I just have a different idea about it. But having left to go out and sort of like pursue it and go and get it, and then seeing like, oh wow, the pursuit of it is actually really, really not soul restoring. I really, really appreciated being part of a team and showing up for work every day and being present and not thinking about my own brand. I worked for a showrunner who at one point said to me, like, you really need to start thinking about your brand. And I was like, oh no, I don't need one more. I don't think I have one. Do I have a brand? I remember asking my agent, should I be worrying about the fact that I don't have a brand? And he yelled at me so hard. Bless him. So,
And
what did he say?
Yeah, what did he say?
He was like, no, that's ridiculous. That is utterly, utterly ridiculous. But that is a thing people are chasing in the entertainment industry, where It's not enough to have your own show. You need to develop it into an empire where you have many shows and then you have your social media. You guys, it's the same thing in the music business too, where one form of success, why have one when you could expand and have a clothing line and have a fragrance line? And it's very seductive. It's like, it's a whole lifestyle brand that you could expand into. And really, at the heart of it, I just am not cut out for any of that. I really am the happiest when I'm writing or when I'm on stage working with actors and directors. And that's my happy place.
I think it's so interesting, like at least in my experience, it feels like it takes a long time to realize that success is contentment. It doesn't mean you have to keep building and growing and changing. And I think that's kind of the fallacy when you're young, and you look at like quote unquote successful people and all they've achieved. And so you think that you have to achieve this level of greatness in order to be successful. At least that's what it's been in my experience just with my music career.
I agree 100%. I completely relate with everything you just said. I just wanted to feel present. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I just really wanted to be where I was. And that has, I think, always been a challenge for me because I'm so in my head and not as much in my body. But I think that contentment is another way of saying that, when where you are is enough and you are not desiring anything else or to be anywhere else.
It reminds me of this moment that we had when we were first playing music. We would go to concerts and we would talk to other musicians and ask them for advice. And we cornered John Foreman from Switchfoot. No, John was busy. We cornered Tim Foreman from Switchfoot and asked him what his advice was. And he said, never look to the next gig. Always be at the one that you're playing, no matter how big or small it is, because you don't know if that next gig is ever going to come. And I feel like that was great advice for us at the very beginning. But it's funny how sometimes you have to go on your own kind of like prodigal son journey to sort of discover, oh, the thing that I thought I wanted is just a bunch of dust.
Yeah, it's really true. Because I'm such a fan of so many people, my ambition for so long was to try to give back to the art forms that I loved and to try to contribute in the way that my heroes in these industries had contributed to my life. And I thought that was the best use of my time on earth. Like, if I'm not giving back and leaving something behind, what am I doing? And my therapist very gently pointed out to me that my so-called legacy is in fact none of my business. And any time that I spend trying to craft a legacy is an extension of my ego and therefore will create suffering. It's me not being present in the moment. It's me not enjoying the right now. It's me looking at the next gig, to quote Tim Foreman.
That's so interesting. It reminds me of this moment when I was in college, I think, when I realized how much I valued songs being correlated to my memories. Oh, when I hear this song, it makes me think of whatever, my mom, And what I started to do was try to pursue capturing the memory and the song while I was listening to it. It's like, I want to remember this memory. And that very act
of manufacturing it
removed me from the moment. And the memories happen on their own. They don't need to be conjured,
It's what's interesting about that is that you actually caught yourself doing it, because I think most people wouldn't catch themselves doing it, but you did, which I love.
Yeah. Well, it certainly didn't work for me. I've given up on it.
This song reminds me of the time that I tried to force the memory to correlate to this song.
Yeah. Thereby ruining the song.
Yeah, exactly. There you go.
I hate this song.
I'm working with Neil Gaiman now on a project. A lot of what we talk about is that when you get the thing you've always wanted, it turns out to be the thing you wanted. Do you know what I mean? It's not what you want now. It's the thing you wanted way back when. I grew up in Oklahoma in the 70s. I was Jewish, where there weren't a lot of Jewish people. I felt very alone and isolated, and I felt like an outsider. And TV and the movies sort of allowed me to feel like I was connected to something. And, in some ways it was really a fantasy. And in some ways, when I do feel connected, and I have a much smaller community in LA than I imagined when I was a kid, but it turns out that I was right about that. The joy in it does turn out to be about community and loving people.
I think this insight is so profound, especially coming from Allan, a person who had a hand in creating a blockbuster movie. And yet, he sees that the real value comes from his meaningful relationships.
I definitely feel like it's a theme in our show that we have to return to again and again. And we've been there. We have made it to the thing that we thought was the finish line, only to find out that the race keeps going after you've gotten there,
Well, and that the quote-unquote award that you get when you get there is not as valuable as you thought it would be. And what really matters is the journey that it took to get there and the people who surrounded you as you kept moving forward.
Well, we're on the home stretch, so let's go back in time to the mid-70s.
Ooh.
I know. We don't go to this era very often.
No, our time machine is not used to traveling to this decade.
Well, let me just prepare you.
Okay.
In the mid-70s, the Rubik's Cube had just been invented.
Oh.
Along with mood rings.
Awesome.
And, get this, pet rocks.
The best.
But even with all of these cool things going on in the 70s, 8-year-old Allan was way more interested in what was on TV on Saturday morning.
Act 1, My Superpower. Allan often felt out of place growing up in Oklahoma, so he found himself immersed in a make-believe world where he felt less alone. This act includes a gas station, an Ivy League school, and a wedding. Here's Allan.
I remember my first Wonder Woman comic book, I think, was Wonder Woman number 212. She had spent a couple of years without her powers, without her costume, essentially being a version of Diana Rigg in The Avengers, where she was wearing sort of a white pantsuit and doing jujitsu and judo. And I came in right at the moment where she rejoins the Justice League, and she resumes being Wonder Woman in all of her magnificence. And I feel like, I don't know if this is true, but I kind of feel like I learned to read reading those comics. I think not. I think I probably learned to read earlier, because that would have put me at like 7 or 8. But I can feel what it feels like to turn the pages, as that 8-year-old kid, and how much I was looking forward to seeing the show every week and waking up early on a Saturday morning for Super Friends and just being obsessed. And I mean, those obsessions are still with me. I'm 53 years old, and there are action figures all over my office, and there's original art on my wall from the 70s. Like, that stuff is very present for me to this day. I am that 8-year-old boy. I just somehow, like, the miracle is that I now do that for a living instead of, it was my escape when I was 8, and now it's become my playground where I spend my time. It's really bizarre talking about it like that. All I wanted was to join the Justice League as a kid, and in some crazy magical backdoor way, I got a seat at that table.
Did you buy the comic, or did your parents buy it? Did they take you to a comic book store? Like, how did you get your hands on it?
There was a convenience store chain in Tulsa called Quick Trip, and they sold comics. And at that time, comics were 15 cents or 20 cents. So I would use my allowance and buy comics. And I was desperate for people. If I could get a ride to Quick Trip, could somebody please just take me to Quick Trip? Because the comics came out, every Wednesday, and there were issues that I didn't want to miss out on. And there weren't designated independent comic book stores at that point. You had to get to the Quick Trip before somebody bought the next issue of Wonder Woman, It was desperate. I was desperate.
And so who gave you a ride?
I walked. Eventually, I just walked. It was far. It was probably a mile or a little over a mile, or I would beg my father, like, hey, on the way home, if you're stopping for gas, can you just please see if Wonder Woman number 215 is on the stand, please?
Was there a ritual?
And did you have like friends that you could talk about this with, or was it completely internal?
It was completely internal because the books I ended up reading were not the books that my friends read, because everybody was reading Spider-Man and the Hulk. And I was reading Wonder Woman and Legion of Superheroes and All-Star Comics. And yeah, I didn't have any DC Comics friends when I was growing up. They were all Marvel boys. And I wasn't into Marvel at that time.
Wow.
But yeah, it's, they felt like they were on sort of a newsprint and there was a very specific smell. And I was very careful, not to get any, to turn the pages really carefully. And I'm lying on my stomach on my bed reading them, and I put them in plastic bags. And, I was a very serious collector at a very early age.
And do you still have a bunch of those, or what happened to
Every
them?
single issue I have ever bought, I have in that bag, with a backing board behind it. Every action figure meticulously kept, like everything. Every Wonder Woman giveaway glass from Arby's. I've got it all.
Amazing.
Well, that's one word for it. Thank you, JJ. I grew up Jewish and gay in Oklahoma in the 70s. And though I don't know how self-aware I was at the time, but I experienced myself as someone other. I didn't like what most boys liked. I didn't like to do the things they like to do. I didn't, I loved to read. I loved Broadway. I loved doing theater. I was not like the other boys. And that profound sense of otherness, you're looking for yourself everywhere. You're looking for somebody to look back at you and say, like, you are a legitimate life form. And because when you're different from everybody else, it sort of undercuts your confidence in so many ways. And boys liked comic books when they were 7 and 8 years old. And so I was like, okay, well, I'm going to try comic books. And at the same time on TV, there was the Wonder Woman television show and there was the Super Friends animated show. And I fell in love with those and then got to comics through those. And what I loved about Wonder Woman was that she was an outsider too. She was the only female superhero in a world of men. And because she was a woman, her writers, in a sexist way, would give her love stories, would give her an emotional life to some degree. And Batman and Superman and the Flash, they did not have emotional lives. Wonder Woman was the only hero in the entire DC universe, in the entire Justice League, who had an emotional life, except for Green Arrow and Black Canary. And so I think I really gravitated toward her. And she had a secret identity where in order to get by, she had to pretend to be less than she was. She had to pretend to be a secretary. She had to pretend to be a nurse. She couldn't be the star. She had to make Steve Trevor shine by comparison when she was Diana Prince. That really spoke to me and gave me a sense of hope that, like, okay, you can pass in the world. You can pretend to be a boy like everybody else. And deep down, you can still be yourself. There's superhero potential, even though you have to hide it from other people because it will, if they knew what you really were, they would destroy you. But I think I had a sense that the thing that would get me in trouble if I let it out was the thing that was going to save my life one day. So she really spoke to me as a kid in ways that I don't even think I realized until much later.
When you say if you let it out would save your life one day, are you referring to something with the...
I think what I'm referring to is my deep, deep, deep sensitivity. I was a really sensitive boy at a time in a place where boys were not supposed to be sensitive or have feelings. And those are all the skills that I've made a career out of and a life out of. Like, my relational skills are the things that have made my life worth living. And those were the things I was encouraged to try to hide my entire childhood and my teenage years as well. So that's what I mean is, like, for sensitive boys like me, that ended up being my superpower, my sensitivity. But at the time, it was the thing that was going to get me beat up on the playground and did. So,
well, it's so interesting. I'm thinking back to the sitcom room where it was much more of a cutthroat environment, and how you could hang there but it's not where you wanted to be. It's not where you were thriving, and how you found your room full of your chosen dinner party guests and you built relationships with them. And eventually, when it got to a point where you had this like once in a lifetime opportunity to make a film, like this woman who you've been working with, who you've built a relationship with, she was just ready to cheer you on and say, go for it, because she didn't feel a sense of competition or that you were trying to take advantage of her. You were just her friend.
That is very well put. That's how it felt. It really felt like my friend was saying, I really love you and I know how much this would mean to you and I want you to go and do this. I went to Yale University, and I'd been a professional actor since I was a kid and was acting quite a bit at Yale, probably more than I should have been. I should have been studying more. But I sort of sensed fairly early on as a young actor that creating my own material was going to be fairly important, and creating material for the people that I loved working with. And so I started writing plays and short stories in college. And then when I graduated from Yale and moved to New York as an actor, I was determined to sort of continue writing plays and writing musicals. And the 10 years that I was in New York after college, I was doing both at the same time. I was acting and I was playwriting.
Did writing or acting at this time bring you more gratification?
Well, both, because a lot of the time I was acting in my own pieces. And it wasn't until I had this incredible thing happen where a short play that I had written got picked up by Manhattan Class Company, and they wanted to produce it. At the same time, I was in a Broadway show in a Neil Simon play. So I was in the very fortunate position of rehearsing my play during the day and then going to a Broadway theater at night. And it became really clear to me really quickly that I was having a lot more fun rehearsing my play with actors than I was even being in this incredible Broadway show.
Why do you think that was?
For a lot of reasons. When you're an actor, especially on Broadway, you're doing the same thing 8 shows a week. And it was an incredible experience, but it wasn't a great play. I think it was a flawed play. We had it like an 8-month run, a 9-month run. And I think there was some frustration in the cast that it wasn't a more satisfying experience for us or for the audience, and that it wasn't a bigger hit. And people kind of move on to the next job fairly quickly in their minds, even if their bodies are still doing the old job. And I saw, some of the best actors in that community, in the Broadway community, feeling frustrated and feeling limited and worrying about the future. And I was 24 years old and I was living my dream of being on Broadway in New York. And I was sort of seeing how creatively limiting that experience was, at least for me. And then I would go to these rehearsals for my play. I was working with a director I loved. I was working with 2 actors that I adored who were incredible. And it was so fulfilling. Working with the actors and rewrites and staging and lighting and every element of production, there was just no comparison. And I had a really good friend who'd been a child actress who'd been in the original cast of Annie. And her parents were both actors and her brother was an actor. And I remember her saying to me, with all the love in the world, like, my darling, if it's not enough for you to go to a Broadway theater every night and sign your initials on the call sheet, if that in and of itself isn't enough for you, you need to get out of the way and make room for somebody else, because that is enough for most people.
Yeah.
And she was right. So I told my agents at that point that I wasn't going to pursue acting full time anymore, that if people wanted to see me, I'd certainly read for things, but I was going to spend all of my time writing from that point on.
The idea of getting the thing that all of these people are struggling to get, they are working their butts off to achieve the position that you have. And to come to terms with the fact that, like, maybe I should be doing something else. Were you conflicted at that moment?
I wasn't conflicted. The difference between the two experiences were so sharp. And I think I have to say at that point, I'd been acting since I was 11 years old, and I wasn't enjoying the pursuit of it. You know, when you're an actor in New York, it takes over your whole life. You're getting material, you're learning material, you're preparing material for auditions, most of which those are jobs you don't get. So I think it had frustrated me for a number of years that I was essentially not in control of my time as an actor. And then even if you are lucky and you do get a job, you have no creative say in who the director is, what the material is, who your co-stars are. You know, it's work for hire. So I was ready at that point to have a greater degree of creative input, if not control, if that makes sense.
How does this lead to LA?
I wrote this play that was produced at Manhattan Class Company, and it got some attention. And I was approached by a producer who specialized in TV movies of the week, which were a thing back at that time. And he wanted to branch out into sitcoms because Friends was sort of the hottest thing on television. And so he basically hired me to come into his office every week and pitch him a new sitcom. And I didn't know any better. So every week, I think I did 6 of them. I just came in and pitched him a new sitcom. I really didn't know. I was like, how about this one? How about that one?
What do you think about this now?
Oh, it's just insanity. It's insanity. But at the time, it was like great boot camp because it really was like come up with a central premise, come up with an emotional hook, come up with a cast of characters. Like, I just didn't know you weren't supposed to do one of these a week. So I wouldn't write 6 scripts in 6 weeks, but I would come in with pitches. And in order to sell me as the writer of these ideas, since I really didn't have any, at that point, professional screenwriting under my belt, I had to write what was called a spec episode of a show that was already on the air, which means like I wrote a homemade script of an episode of Friends that I completely made up. And that was supposed to show people who were familiar with Friends that I could write in the format of the show. I could write in the voices of the characters. I knew how to structure a story. I knew how to put 3 jokes on a page. It's basically just saying to someone like, here, this is me trying to do the thing that you're already familiar with. And then they decide whether I was good at it or not. Yeah. So I wrote that episode of Friends. And then nothing really happened with that producer. But a little while later, I was at a wedding in Los Angeles.
Who was getting married?
My friend John Ehrlich, who's a composer. John and I had lived in New York at the same time, and he was working on his musicals, and I was working on my musicals, and we'd been friends for a long time, and he'd moved out to LA to write music for TV and film. And he and his, about to be wife at that time were saying, you really should move to LA and become a television writer. It's really not that hard. I was like, you guys, that can't be so. He's like, no, you can do it. You totally can do it. You should just come out. And I had been adamant that LA was terrifying to me. I was a New Yorker for the past, previous 10 years. And I was like, I'm not moving out to LA without a job. That just seems silly.
What was scary about it?
Well, everything. Being unemployed, having to learn a new city. I had this bias against LA that New Yorkers have. New York is such a small town in a way. You've got your community, you've got your place where you like your bagels. It's very accessible. Yeah. All you need is a subway token at that time, and you could go anywhere and do anything. Yeah. And LA is this vast, sprawling network of tiny little worlds and neighborhoods, and it was just the idea of trying to break into that world where I didn't really have any connections or purchase. It just seemed overwhelming and vast. So I thought, you know what, I'm just going to stay in New York and write my plays and my musicals. And if LA happens, it happens. And if it doesn't, it doesn't. And I was seated next to someone I had known in college. I had been very close with his brother who had passed away. And I hadn't seen Mike, my friend Mike, since then. And he was with his wife, Jennifer. And he, at that time, was co-running a sitcom called Murphy Brown on CBS. Mm-hmm. And what that essentially means is that you're the head writer. You run the writer's room. You're the person who makes basically every decision that leads from the idea stage until the show airs. For every line of dialogue, for every piece of wardrobe, all the sets he approves or she approves of, and you're also responsible for the budget. So you're sort of the leader of this vast team of wonderful, great people, all of whom are experts in their field, whether it's editing, whether it's wardrobe, whether it's hair and makeup. But ultimately, the showrunner is the person who says, yes, I love that hairdo. No, she would never wear those shoes. Let's try to find a better joke for the end of that act. You know what I mean? The story's not working. Let's put it back on the board. Like, it's the showrunner who basically decides when the thing is ready to go.
I'm learning so much.
So you're at a wedding and you happen to sit next to one of the guys who does that for a major primetime TV show.
Yes. And he is at the point in his career where he's about to go off and leave Murphy on his own. And he had a deal at NBC to develop new shows. And of course, as you know from this story, I've got a ton of sitcom ideas ready to go.
I just happen to have 14 comedy ideas.
Yeah, I'm picturing you at the wedding, like opening up this briefcase.
No, I mean, I didn't happen to think that any of my ideas were any good. And the nice thing about this moment with Michael and Jennifer was that we didn't really spend a lot of time talking about TV. We had a lot of common interests, the three of us. So we ended up talking about comic books and Broadway musicals, and we were both friends of the groom. And so we all had gone to Yale together. So we were, there were all these other things to talk about and to catch up on. And then it was sort of at the end of it where Mike was like, I'd love to read your stuff, if you want to send it. And it just changed my life because he essentially brought me out to Hollywood and gave me my first job within a year later. And they very quickly became two of my closest friends. And I lived with them for a while when I moved out to LA. It was just such an act of love and friendship and trust. To this day, I don't think I've ever met anybody who's done anything as brave and as generous as Michael and Jennifer did for me.
Do you recall getting the wedding invitation and going, of course I'm going to this wedding? Or was there a chance that you never would have gone?
There's a big chance. I don't go to weddings. I have a no wedding policy for the most part.
Really?
Oh yeah. I don't do that.
So why did you make the exception?
Well, it was an interesting one because my friend Jen, who had talked me out of being an actor, for which I'm forever grateful to her, who was my best friend at the time, she was also very close to the bride and groom. And Jen said, you're going to this and we're going to go together. And at the time I was living in Arizona, which is a whole other story. So I wasn't even in New York. And I think because I was so close to LA, being in Arizona, and she was coming from New York and I hadn't seen her in months, it became this thing where I was like, all right, well, if Jen's going to be there, I'll go for sure. Because I hadn't seen my best friend in forever. So that's why I ended up going. But I usually say no to weddings and just send a very nice gift.
So if you hadn't gone to this wedding, your life as you know it wouldn't exist.
Yes, and Dave, I don't think that I had put that together until you just said it. So maybe I should start going to more weddings.
That's the moral. That's the moral of the story. Go to more weddings.
Yeah. And then this thing happened. When you're not looking for it and you're not networking, you end up sitting next to your old friend from college who says, do you want to come and write TV? So that's what happened.
We were laughing about Allan's comment, but I think if there's any lesson we can take from our conversations with our guests, it's to be open to the opportunities that come our way every day.
Yeah, again and again, these life-changing moments occur in the places we would least expect. It's also really sweet to hear Allan's heart and his story, since I often hear about Hollywood being so cutthroat and competitive, but he's living proof that you can be kind and still have a place at the table.
Just don't make fun of Wonder Woman and you'll be fine, JJ.
Yeah, otherwise you unleash the beast.
Yeah, he'll beat you up. Well, our show's nearly done, but we have one more segment we like to call...
Let's rewind the tape!
Allan is a respected Hollywood writer whose work has been featured both on the big screen and on television.
But his first job writing for TV wouldn't have happened if he hadn't attended a wedding.
Which he only went to because an old friend from his time on Broadway invited him.
But his Broadway career wouldn't exist if he hadn't learned to embrace and express his rich emotional nature.
Because he recognized it while flipping through the pages of Wonder Woman issue number 212 when he was 8 years old.
That's so amazing!
Allan's not on social media, did you know that?
No.
He's not.
Okay.
I'll bet he's better for it.
Probably. This episode of Instrumental was produced by me, JJ Heller.
And me, Dave Heller,
Our theme music is my song, Big Love, Small Moments.
that I helped write.
To find out more about me, listen to more of my songs, or watch my music videos, please visit jjheller.com. That's 2 letter J's, HELLER.com.
We'll be back next week with another episode of Instrumental.
So be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.